So, John, without further ado, happy Monday.
Hey, Carrie. I think we might need to cancel our Paris vacations this year. What do you think?
Well, if you go, make sure you bring a couple of bags of marshmallows because you're going to need them, you know? My God, can you believe what's happening? I mean,
yeah,
it's shocking, isn't it? You shocked? I'm shocked.
Well, I mean, it's not hard to believe that France has troubles. You know, we'll start with the fact that they almost doubled their government debt as a percent of GDP since 2008, which right there tells you that that's a problem system. Not that they doubled their debt, but they doubled it relative to GDP, which is an even bigger increase. And when you take on way too much debt, it gets harder to get anything done for a government because you've already used up a lot of the ammo that you would have in other circumstances used to buy off your voting blocks, right? To keep your constituents satisfied.
That's what it's all about.
Interestingly, while everybody else was electing populists like Donald Trump or, you know, the guy in Brazil or the guy in Italy, you know, who were going to tear out the existing system by the roots and replace it with something else, France in 2017 elected an extremely moderate guy, even though he wasn't from the main political parties, but he was every step of the way, middle of the road. He, you know, Emmanuel Macron, he was a well-spoken, nice-looking young guy who came from the banking industry and who was going to modernize France without unduly threatening the elites or the welfare state or any other aspect of French society that was very important to a large group of people. And he came in and made some very modest changes. He modernized their labor laws a little bit. They're still really restrictive by American standards. Like if you want to lay people off, you're running a company in France, you got to go before a judge and justify it. And it used to be that you had to justify it in terms of your entire global footprint. In other words, if you're doing well in Australia but not in France, you still can't lay people off in France. Well, they changed that law so that the judge just looks at your French operations, but you still have to go before a judge. You know, that's the kind of thing that makes you wonder why any company would hire anybody ever in a system like that.
Why would you open
it's so hard to get rid of the people if they turn out not to work out.
Yeah, why would you open an office there? You know, would you ever open an office? You wouldn't do it. You'd be insane to do it, right? Yeah.
And then he raised diesel fuel prices slightly, not very much, but anyhow, that set things off. The French people are, on the one hand, they're so coddled. Europe in general basically made a decision to coast on their accumulated capital 20 or 30 years ago. And they're basically just living very nice, cushy lives with short work weeks and phenomenal retirement benefits, et cetera, on borrowed money. You know, everybody's borrowing insane amounts of money in that system. And as an American, I have to qualify that by saying that doesn't mean I'm saying any good things about the U.S. system. You know, we're doing the same thing. But we're talking about Europe now, and that's what Europe is doing. They have absolutely massive unfunded liabilities for their versions of Social Security and Medicare. So they're going broke at an accelerating rate. And their citizens don't completely get it because they've been so coddled by their governments. So let the French government, for instance, impose just a little bit more rigor, marketplace rigor on French people, and they freak out. And that's what's happening right now. So you've got these massive street demonstrations in which people are overwhelming the police, burning cars, and this is in the rich part of Paris, by the way. So they're not just burning down their own working class neighborhoods like rioters tend to do in the U.S. They're going to the rich parts of Paris and smashing stores and setting expensive cars on fire, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really big deal. It's a real threat to the government, and they're thinking about declaring a state of emergency, which is their version of martial law, which would give the police a lot of leeway to clear the streets, even if they have to use force. So we'll see where this goes, but it's a very big deal for the European Union and for the Eurozone, because France is the second biggest economy next to Germany, and let them have civil unrest, which leads to regime change, which leads to an election between the far right and the far left, which is kind of what would happen if Macron got kicked out of office because of these riots. You'd have Marine Le Pen and whoever it is on the far left in a presidential runoff, which means whoever won in that election would end up running the country. And both are, so far out of the mainstream by French standards that you would have a really serious change of direction for the French economy and the French political system that would threaten the Eurozone. And the euro is a very important currency. Trillions of dollars of bonds are denominated in euros. So you get the potential for a global financial crisis starting with France here. So we'll see how it goes. But that's the stakes. And they're very high. And that makes this an interesting story besides just for the spectacle of cars on fire in the middle of Paris.
Yeah, I've been watching it. And at first I thought it was Islamic-induced violence. But then I realized, no, this is the real deal. These are the middle class, and they're upset over the global warming tax nonsense. So they're paying more money, way more money at the pump than they should be paying anyway. And they're just not happy there. They're just like pissed.
It's interesting to see a European country raising their gas taxes because they already pay, as you said, a lot in taxes on fuel, which I think is a good idea, less about the whole global warming thing than about the transition to better technologies. Solar power, wind power, and electric cars are just vastly cooler technology than our current way of getting and using energy, whether it's for transportation or for home heating or whatever. So anything that speeds up that process, I think, is
but there's a problem with
fairly defensible thing.
People don't want the government dictating this stuff because they always pick the wrong winners.
These guys are already so far down that path that raising taxes on energy in Europe to American eyes seems like an extreme activity because, they've already done it. They've already raised taxes dramatically in the past few decades on energy. So the incentives are already there. It's already an idea that is subsidized by the government if you want to set up a solar plant or if you want to buy an electric car or something like that. So it doesn't seem like it would really accomplish much at the margin. You get diminishing marginal utility when you raise taxes on something beyond a certain point. It's very effective early on and then less effective as the taxes go up.
Yeah, and their whole system is just a freaking mess here. Let's face it, Rick. It's just a mess. And then you've got Brussels wanting to dictate everything, and they want to be in charge. The pointy-headed bureaucrats. They've got an unworkable system here, Rick. I mean, you've said it many a time. You've got a new one out on why we're ungovernable. And boy, if there was ever a reason why we're ungovernable, this is it, isn't it?
Yeah. The basic premise of that series is that when a country borrows too much money, it loses the ability to keep political constituencies happy in a way that gives you a stable ruling coalition or one government or one party in charge of the government for long enough to actually show results that can be judged. Instead, what happens is every election is a throw the bums out event, and you get a series of new governments, each of which come in with all these big reform ideas and each of which fails miserably because they don't have the money to do any of the things they want to do, even if those things were good ideas in the first place. And so you get political chaos. And that's the nature of the world now. Pretty much every election is this terrifying prospect for the establishment, because you don't know if if Bernie Sanders is going to win, or if Donald Trump is going to win, or if somebody who's more extreme than either of those guys is going to win. You just don't know, because things are so up in the air. And that's really the situation in France. The last election in France was between Macron, who wasn't a member of the two leading political parties, and Marine Le Pen, who was the leader of the far-right party. And the two main political parties in France weren't even in the runoff. That's how crazy that election was. And now the guy that got elected is failing on a biblical scale just about here, which means the next election will be even crazier. And that's just how it works when you're broke. So expect that everywhere.
We knew he was going to fail before he even took the oath of office, right? I mean, we knew he was going to fail, because you can't solve it with more of what got you into it. Unsound economic programs.
Well, see you can't, not only that, you can't solve it at all. There's no way to fix a heavily indebted system without some kind of a crisis.
Yes.
So the crisis has to happen. We could elect Ron Paul here in the U.S. right now, who you and I think has mostly good ideas, and he would still fail he would still preside over a huge crisis, just because the damage has already been done.
Yeah, that's true. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's so true. And
Europe is in much worse shape than us in a lot of ways, because they have extreme restrictions on the workings of free markets, and in some areas of most of their economies, they have even more debt. If you include unfunded liabilities, they have incredibly generous versions of Social Security and Medicare over there, which they don't put any money aside for. They're on a pay-as-you-go basis, which means their finances looked pretty good 10 years ago when there were a whole bunch of people working and paying for a relatively low number of retirees. But now that baby boomers are retiring, the cost of all of their pension plans and basically their social safety net in general is mushrooming. So their finances are getting worse and worse at an accelerating rate. And there's nothing they can do about it, because if they try to cut benefits or raise taxes to cover benefits, you get France. You get Paris is burning. And the same thing would happen in Germany if Germany tried it, although Germany is the least likely to go this route in the short term. Yeah. But France, Italy, Spain, countries like that have absolutely no solutions for any of this that don't involve massive civil unrest and a state of emergency and regime change. So eventually, the end game here is a big currency reset, right? Where
it seems like it.
They announce on a Sunday night, from now on, the euro is gold backed, but at a price of 10,000 euros.
It's gold backed, but you can't buy it. You can't buy gold.
Yeah. Maybe you can't own gold. But
anyone who has it, it's gold backed. But if you don't, then you're plumb out of luck. And that's where we're heading, someplace, some variation. Even, I don't believe it'll truly be gold backed, though. It'll be fake gold backed. They'll say it's gold backed, but it won't be.
Well, yeah. I'm talking ideal currency reset when I use that as an example, but there are all kinds of variations, a lot of which could be outright fraud, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one kind of currency reset is just continuing inflation, where they lower the value of the currency year after year after year. The danger of that, of course, is that people front run it. We figure out that's what they're going to do, and we assume they're going to do it forever, and we just bail on the currency. That's the Austrian School of Economics crack-up boom.
Right.
And
correct.
Governments will want to avoid that, because the end game of a hyperinflation is definitely regime change. The guys in charge who preside over the hyperinflation don't get to preside over the fix afterwards. They get tossed out of office somewhere along the way, and they don't want that to happen.
And they might even get hung by their thumbs, right?
Yes. You see how violent the French people are when you raise their gas taxes by a little bit. Wait till you completely destroy their currency, so their savings evaporate, and see what they do then. So yeah, and any kind of civil unrest that you can imagine is completely possible in a system that is surprised by it, and it's already volatile to start with.
So it's basically running amok.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what we're looking at.
So the Sunday night currency reset is by far the least dangerous option. And if these guys see that, then maybe they'll get us out of this mess with just one burst of inflation. So on Monday morning, milk costs $10 a gallon and bread is $12 a loaf. But it doesn't increase from that point forward. So your savings in your bank account get a lot less valuable, but your future savings are protected by a sound money regime, which was imposed on Sunday night. And that's got at least the possibility of succeeding in a non-chaotic way. It still might be a mess because the people whose savings evaporated are going to be really mad. But you can make the case that, look, we had to do this and now the system is fixed and we learned our lessons, yada, yada. And, maybe you've got a chance of getting through that with the current political system intact. But none of the other options really make it look likely that we'll avoid some kind of chaos. And the fact that we're seeing it out there on our TV screens now happening in France, which is definitely one of the more stable European countries, means that it can happen anywhere.
Used to be one of the more stable systems, I don't know so much anymore. How stable is it, right?
Well, yeah. Today it's not one of the more stable European countries, but up until last week it was. France and Germany were the core of the European Union. They were the ones calling the shots. They were the ones who had a stake in continuity. They were the status quo powers in Europe.
Yes.
And under, the current French government would love to maintain that. They want to stay status quo. But the revolutionary powers in the French system, which is the far right and the far left, are gaining votes with every misstep on the part of the central government. So we really could see the National Front under Marine Le Pen in charge of France in a year or 2 years or 6 months or 3 weeks. There's no way to know now the way things are going.
That's death for the EU. She's total death. I mean,
well, she's anti-Euro.
When
she
you
would,
look,
if she could take France out of the Eurozone and go back to the French franc.
I don't think she will, but because I think everybody has a great idea, with Mike Tyson. Plan is great until you get hit in the head. And
that's right.
I'm just thinking, like, John, it's like you and I both knew this guy was a total lightweight when they hired him. Okay? Elections, basically, they hire you, right? And they hire you, and guess what? They can fire you. And they fire you ingloriously. It's like look, 1 minute they love Churchill. He won World War II for England. Not really. I mean, the U.S. won it for them, but it's kind of irrelevant. And the next minute, guess what? Not so much, right? They don't like him so much anymore, and he's out of office on his behind. And what's that old saying, John? The electorate is fickle, right? And boy,
I don't know if that's a saying, Kerry, but it's definitely true. People will change their minds in a hurry, especially when they're under stress. And see, in a world of too much debt, everybody's under stress.
Correct.
That's how we got Donald Trump. There were so many frustrated people out there in the U.S. that they were willing to take a flyer on a guy who had never held public office and who had a lot of ideas that were way out of the mainstream, but that seemed to be addressing the sources of the stress for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
So
totally.
When the guys in charge aren't addressing the sources of your stress, you look around for somebody else to do it. And that's why all these elections are so crazy, year after year, month after month. And that's why they will continue to be crazy, because the source of stress can't be dealt with. It can't be fixed. If you've already borrowed a ton of money, there's really nothing you can do about it short of the big crisis that gets the debt wiped out. If you're an individual, you need to declare bankruptcy.
Yes.
Or you need to scale your life back to such a point that, you've sold your house, you've sold your SUVs, you've sold your big screen TV, and you're living really small now just to get by. And even that doesn't fix anything. It just delays the inevitability of your bankruptcy in most cases.
Yeah.
And that's where most countries in the world are right now, most major countries. They've borrowed so much money that the repo man is driving towards their house now. And they really don't have a solution for it.
Bad frickin' analogy, but boy, is it the truth, John. There's just, once it happens, once it starts, there's just no stopping it. It is a conflagration. And it's, just like, what I liken it to, John? The political scene is exactly like the economic scene. It's spread from one country to the next to the next. And when it starts going crazy, there is no stopping it, John. I mean, that's what we're seeing. A contagion happened here in the U.S., happened in Brazil, happened in Mexico. It's happened numerous times over the past 10 years, Trump being the worst. Then we had Brexit that they're trying to screw the English people on now. You think there's a revolution in France? Wait till the English show up with pitchforks in the square, because their situation, contrary to what they're expecting by approving Brexit, actually is far worse than it ever was. Hey, we got to cover one other thing, and that is the Trump G20 summit. Hey, I didn't know it, but I blinked my eyes and all of the problems are solved, John.
Yeah, this is happening pretty much according to script. Basically,
we knew it.
The system started to spin out of control in October.
Yes.
And when something like that happens, governments go through stages of addressing it. First, they talk and see if saying the right words will fix the problem. And that's what they did this time. The Fed came out and said, you know what, maybe we won't raise interest rates so much anymore. And that helped the markets a little bit. And then Trump came out and said, we've declared a truce in the U.S.-China trade war. And that helped the markets a lot today. But you notice neither one of those things were an action of any kind. They just said soothing words and hoped that will take care of the turmoil in the financial markets. Now, normally the way it works is the first thing doesn't help at all, or it helps for just a very short while, and then things start spinning out of control again. So if the usual script plays out, we got another few days in the market when people are optimistic, and then, reality starts to reassert itself. The bear market returns in equities, interest rates start going up again at the long end of the yield curve, and the markets start flaking out again. And after that, the government has to do something, but it'll do some really minor thing, like the Fed might raise interest rates in December and then announce they're done. Okay, so one and done, no more interest rates going forward. That's a quarter point change, and it's very minor and not a big deal, but it changes the trajectory, which they hope might fix things. And then China and the U.S. might actually cut a trade deal in desperation that is a really minor trade deal. It doesn't actually fix much of anything, but both sides get something they can point to, and then they can say, okay, we we improve things for our constituencies, for our people, and then go from there. That will also be a very minor thing that didn't change the reality of virtually anything. And then they'll see if that fixes things. And that probably won't either. And then the real stuff starts happening. Then the Fed has to cut interest rates. Then the government has to radically increase spending in some way. So you got to liquefy the economy in a way that stops the decline in asset prices. And that's 2008 over again. When the system is really starting to spin out of control, then you go to QE, then you go to negative interest rates. And that's ultimately where we're headed. So it's just a question of the progression. What happens between now and the reinstitution of quantitative easing and the reinstitution of ZIRP and NIRP and all the other monetary games, because that's the 2019, 2020, 2021 reality. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing right now is just the very early steps in that direction by the U.S. government and the Fed.
Mm-hmm. So we got more fun to look forward to, huh? So
fun for gold bugs,
yeah, we're nowhere,
and short sellers.
We're nowhere near at the end of this thing, is what you're saying, right? I mean, it's got a ways to go because they got to try everything, right? They're going to try everything they can to keep it going, but eventually it's not going to work, and then we get to that point that you and I have been waiting for 10 years now. And because, unlike most, we believe that that man is very fallible and really, I was going to say, can't get out of his own way, is really just just this mistake-making machine, effectively.
Well, human nature leads to the same mistakes being made over and over again, and each generation forgets the mistakes of the previous generation or the previous two generations.
So
the grandkids don't remember what grandpa went through, and so they do the same thing over again, and then their grandkids forget what they went through. So, we're in the kids forgetting about what happened to grandpa back during the Great Depression and making those same mistakes again stage.
Yes.
So it shouldn't be a surprise. It's a repeating part of human history. And the only difference this time around is that we've set up a system that's global instead of local. Everybody has unlimited fiat currency printing presses. Everybody has the ability to create new forms of exotic financial instruments that have never been seen before and that are potentially dangerous in unforeseen ways. So when the reckoning comes for this one, it's going to be bigger than anything we've ever seen before just because the mistakes are global.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you are right. And it's scary as can be, but really, what else can we do? What else can you do?
We can protect ourselves. That's all we can do. And you do that with precious metals, and you do that maybe by shorting some overvalued stocks and generally going debt-free and extremely liquid and extremely conservative with your finances.
Yep. I think that's the winning trade here, John. And we're going to see a lot more of this madness. It's going to spread to other countries all over the world. I think this is just the beginning here. We're at some kind of cycle of real political instability, and there's kind of like no backing away from it, right? No getting away from it. I don't think so. I don't think there's anything we can do about it, and just kind of find your bunker, because what else can you really do here? I mean, look, you and I have been talking about this for years. What are your alternatives? And really, yeah, buy gold for sure. I mean, let's face it. We've been talking about that, but I don't think that that's the end of the equation. I think there's a lot more you're going to have to be thinking of, and that's a question that somebody asked that we are going to cover next time, John, because they asked, what do you do when the whole thing comes tumbling down? How do you prepare for it? And we both have our own individual take on this. But you just need to get ready, because it's becoming more and more obvious that no matter what happens, this is going to happen. And